So I'd like to welcome now, we're running a bit behind time, but I'd really like to welcome now Katrina Barker. Where is she? So Dr. Katrina Barker comes to us from University of Western Sydney, and I particularly have been really looking forward to Katrina coming up because this is the first time we've met. But we both have similar sorts of research interests. We just come at it from different ways. Katrina has a background a little bit like Andrew Martin. She researches in the area of student motivation and achievement and engagement. And she uses quantitative research methods, whereas I'm the qualitative person. So we're going to have some really good conversations tomorrow. Thank you. Welcome. Thanks, Linda.
Thanks, everyone. So, yes, I have a background in quantitative research, but I'm also learning a lot more about mixed method studies, and in particular, the study I'm going to focus on today is a mixed method study. So it had a large quantitative component with a survey that ran across 3 years, but it also comprised of interviews with students, and that's actually what I'm going to be focusing on today predominantly, is some of the voices from the young people from this study. It was an Australian Research Council linkage grant with our partner, the New South Wales Department of Education and Communities, and it focused on kids who traditionally would have left school early. But in 2009, when we started the study, we had an announcement in New South Wales that the leaving school age was going to increase to 17. So for some of you, that's already the case in your state, but for us in New South Wales, it was new news. So we captured students in 2009 hearing about the news and looking at what was going to happen in those contexts in those schools. So what we found is that 1 in 3 of our participants in the study actually turned around their thinking. So initially they reported that they wanted to leave school, but what we found over time is they do change their minds, and 1 in 3 of those students who initially said, "I'm out of here," actually changed their mind and they wanted to stay on at school. So we wanted to get down to the details around what was happening for these kids who do want to stay on. We wanted to drill down and understand over time what thought processes, what contextually was happening to make these kids who traditionally were disengaged want to stay on. And it actually meant that it was around learning, not just about what was going on in school, but learning beyond school. So there are 2 brochures that we've produced as a result of this study, some of which are in your packages. One of them is staying on and one of them is going on. So what's going on at school is staying on, and what goes on outside of school learning is the going on brochure. For us as teachers, it's quite daunting in New South Wales when the raising the school leaving age was introduced, because traditionally a lot of these kids would have left school. So the schools were concerned about what behaviours are they going to encounter. And our study from the survey showed that over time there were decreases in really important factors that influence how well kids are going to engage at school. So the young people were finding that they valued school less. They would put obstacles in their way when it came to study. They would often have less friends. So these factors were playing out in what was going on in the school context. So over 3 years, we conducted the surveys as well as the interviews. And what we did is that we had in the study 9 schools across New South Wales. We were encouraged to look at particular regions in New South Wales by our partner, and specifically looking at 3 schools in 3 regions of New South Wales. 2 of the schools in each region were performing above expectations. So that value-adding schools is, given their socio-economic status, they actually had performed above expectations. So they had higher numbers of students staying on at school than what would be anticipated. So they were doing good things, and we wanted to look at what they were. as well as one school that was performing according to expectations. So given where they were placed in the context, they did have retention rates as what you would expect. You can see the sample size. The attrition was 200 students across the whole study that we lost, and some of that was that they changed schools, but others did actually leave. So in the first year of the study, we had students in years 7, 8 and 9, and we tracked them through all the way to 9, 10 and 11. So the key questions that we were asking is, do engaged students turn around? And if so, what is happening for them? And the answer, in short, is yes, kids can turn around. Some of them are reigniting an interest in learning, not just at school, it might be learning beyond the school. And so pathways is something that we were really interested in looking at. The more we know about the diverse reasons that lead to most disengaged students to turn around, the better able we are to re-establish some of the engagement with learning. So I hope some of the messages from today's presentation you can draw away and think about, how does that relate to your context? How can I apply what I'm hearing today in my situation, for me as an individual teacher, or as a more systemic approach as to what your school could do? So looking at the data, we had the students complete a survey that asked them to identify when they wanted to leave school. Of the almost 2,000 participants, 120 said that they wanted to leave school early. They wanted to leave before the end of year 12 or before they reached the age of 17. We're really interested in what the thought processes were behind those kids, so we interviewed them. And over the course of 3 years, what we found is that 56% didn't change much at all. But there was an important number, one in 3, that did change and what was happening for them. We used, in addition to the question about when did they want to leave school early, we also looked at other factors like their school self-concept, their valuing of schooling, their persistence, and those factors also helped us categorise those students according to whether they wanted to stay and continue on with schooling as well. We found that re-engaging, for those kids, the 23 that we had interviews across 3 years, so complete data set that we could track their process, that there were 2 steps involved in re-engaging. The first is that there were triggers, and the second, so triggers is there was some kind of event, a critical event that led them to change their mind, but to make sure that they committed to that change, there was a process that followed. So today I'm going to spend some time talking about what those triggers were for those young people and what schools were doing and parents and peers were doing to maintain that commitment to furthering their learning. So if we look at some of the critical events, they were revolved around verbal conversations. And so parents were really important, relatives were really important in having conversations about valuing education, about the importance of education. Teachers respecting the students was another key critical event. Opening of the curriculum as they progressed through the school years was also important, so choices with electives, having some independence, as well as cementing a plan for their future. And I'm going to give a really specific example of that towards the end of the presentation. So first of all, one of the key triggers was seeing yourself as capable. So the young people wanted to see that they could do the work at school. To see that they were capable was really important. So the sorts of things that happened to change their mindset, because initially when we interviewed them in 2009, they were saying things like, you know, I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I can't do this, I'm not smart enough. They were very common conversations that we had with these young people. And surprisingly, they're really excited to have conversations with people outside of the school. So in some ways, we felt that we might have been part of that critical contribution to an event to be a trigger as well. There's no reason to apply themselves at school. But as we progressed through these conversations with 23 of them, a lot of them talked about how they had changed their thinking about themselves, that they had had a conversation with a teacher who had praised them. Now, teachers give praise all the time, but for some of those kids, that praise, the phone call home to their parents, was enough to inspire them to believe that they were capable. And so that was really important. Valuing education. They changed their perspective. So initially when we interviewed them, you know, school sucks, I don't want to be here, I don't care about school, what does it mean to me? To seeing in those conversations in the subsequent 2 years that school was important to them. They could see the value of school. We noticed from the disengaged kids who didn't turn around that when we asked them, you know, what do your parents think? Oh, my parents are happy as long as I'm happy. Have you heard that conversation before? We found that the kids who turned around, the parents, it wasn't good enough. The parents were actually saying, it's really important that you try, it's really important that you study further, that they valued education themselves, and they explicitly had those conversations with those kids. Often it was a boyfriend. You know, he kicked me up the butt and told me if I want to be a teacher, I really need to pull my socks up. It was a cousin looking at how their life had turned out, not finishing school, and observing that they didn't aspire, they were too young when they left school, and there were lots of associated problems with leaving school too young. Or alternatively, it was a family member. You know, they don't have a successful job. They just defined the parent's job as, you know, very bad. I don't want to be in that situation, so I really better put effort into education because it's really important. Discovering a passion for learning. And we've heard this conversation, that theory, it's boring, it's not relevant to me in those early school years in year 7, 8, 9. And as they progressed 8, 9, 10 and 9, 10 and 11, we heard them change their thinking around that they were engaging more because they had electives, opening the curriculum. The schools that had a large array of subject choices were really benefiting their students, or the young people, because they could have more choice. There were also vet and school-based apprenticeships and traineeships that were available for the students that reinvigorated their passion for learning. So it wasn't just about passion for being at school and staying on at school. It was a passion for learning more generally that was coming out. The content-endorsed English was also another new innovation when we commenced this study. Thinking about their future. A lot of the kids initially talked about not knowing what they wanted to do. They didn't have a clear plan. A lot of the schools had structures and policies in place where they had career expos, but they didn't just leave it at the career expos. They went into a lot of detail into individualised attention. So they had meetings one-on-one with the kids about what their plan was. In one school, it was renowned in that school of how important this portfolio that they had the young people developed about whether they were eligible to move from year 10 into the senior years. And they dressed up for the day, and some students were unsuccessful at that interview. And they were given a provisional passport into year 11, and they had weekly meetings with their support staff to help mentor those young people to a concrete pathway. Some of it was not necessarily choosing theoretical subjects that they construed as irrelevant to themselves, but would be more concrete in that they would choose electives that would give them a certificate 2 or 3, coursework through vets, and would lead to post-secondary education or to an apprenticeship or to full-time employment. So the schools were very strong in supporting individuals with a concrete path for them. So the processes to sustain that initial trigger, the conversation, the observing of what was happening to kids who didn't stay on or didn't have an interest in learning, was really critical through the friends and how friendship looked for them. There was a dramatic change. The relationships, we've heard a lot about relationships today, so it's nice to hear that these studies are being validated, because we can hear that this is a common thread with teachers being really central to the decision making and facilitating students in the setting. Putting more effort into their schoolwork. So, new friends. We heard kids making a really conscious effort of changing their friendship groupings. Some of them were very sophisticated and thought about how they were going to navigate that social aspect. They knew that the friends that they were hanging out with were no good. They knew that they were disruptive, resistant to teachers, and they made a conscious effort to change that component of themselves. So they had a group that they would work with and a group that they would socialise with. Others of them made a clear cut from their previous friendship groupings, but were still, friendly in a sense, but not at all connected with their previous friendship groupings. Teachers facilitated this. Often they could see a kid turning around and they would help them move into a group work activity where there was a more a group of students that were going to facilitate them with that turning around, rather than continuing putting them in with the group of friends that they're trying to transition from. There were new ways of being friends. Some of them had never shared study notes before or talked about their schoolwork with their friends. It had always been other topics of conversations. So they were much more explicit in talking about school with this new friendship grouping. Respectful relationships with teachers. They said that initially teachers were unfair, unsupportive, they felt that they lacked control. These were features that they were unimpressed about teachers, but there was a developmental component to the changes that we heard these kids change their thought processes around teachers, that actually teachers are okay. And if I treat them with respect, they'll actually treat me with respect. So they saw a change in their behaviour and really appreciated their teachers. Putting more effort into their schoolwork. So one student I'm thinking of in particular was working late hours. He was getting home 2-3 o'clock in the morning. The next day he'd get up for school. Sometimes he wouldn't get up for school. He knew that that was conflicting with his effort to re-engage with school, so he actually stopped working altogether to refocus his studies. He wanted his family to be proud of him. And so the valuing of school, seeing that he was capable, all played a trigger in him changing the context. So putting that more effort into his schoolwork was critical. Constructing new pathways. Schools were very strategic in helping young people identify a pathway, because there is so much out there, it's very difficult for them to know what they wanted to do. So in-depth conversations. One school had case management, where they would actually have the whole staff together, the picture of the student, and they would talk about how can we facilitate this student, what are we doing, what have you noticed, have there been any changes? So there were regular meetings around these individuals. And also one that I'm thinking of who didn't want to be at school but actually wanted to be a nurse. But there was no way she was going to go through the academic coursework because it disinterested her. She wasn't perceiving herself as good at maths. It wasn't relevant to what she perceived to be to a nursing degree. So she took on the school-based apprenticeship traineeship and studied aged care and in the allied health professions, and completed 2 Certificate 3s in Year 11 and left in Year 11 to full-time work employment, and is now working towards entering at a university. So she found an alternative pathway to get to her desired path, to her desired career. So triggers, there are things that we can do in schools to help activate those triggers, and we can also put in place some processes to help sustain the commitment of these young people to those changes. So there is some further reading if you're interested, and there's some brochures in your booklets as well. And I know that time's run out, so if there's any questions, just quickly before morning tea, I know that you're... No? Lovely. Oh yes, and if you'd like to talk to me afterwards, that would be fabulous. Terrific. Thank you.